Welcome to the KISSBCP webinar series, where we discuss all things that relate to no building scenarios, to no people scenarios, no third-party supplier scenarios, and lastly, no systems, all combined to create Chaos the Dragon, which is battled by King Phoenix and his shield. So business continuity planning for a very long time has been something done off the side of your desk or a dreaded task that lands on a newbie's to-do list. The latest incident, COVID-19, has underlined the value of a BCP. As we approach COVID's first anniversary, I know it's kind of scary that it seems like it was just a week ago. Now, more than ever, it's critical to put some focus on your BCP. This webinar is called BCP Made Simple for a reason. Kingsbridge's goal is to develop BCPs that are simple to build, simple to maintain, and simple to execute. We've been building plans with that mindset since 1983 and want to share the fundamentals that we've learned along the way. Today's webinar will be presented by Tam Williams. She has been instrumental in Kingsbridge's BCP building for years and can speak with firsthand knowledge on the success of these fundamentals. Before we get started, we have some housekeeping items to take care of. As mentioned in the intro emails and the details emails, we have included some polls in this webinar. They aren't designed to trip you up. They're simply to share goals with each other to better understand each other and our goals for our BCP. We would appreciate it if you'd answer them, but we also understand it if you don't want to. All attendees are currently muted, so if you have questions, please use the Q&A function, which is a second button from the right along the bottom of your window. If questions don't get answered during the webinar and we have some time left, we'll try to get them answered at the end of the webinar. If we run out of time, we'll answer them via email post-webinar. If you have an in-depth question, please feel free to email us with any of your questions and we'll happily answer them either via email or Zoom at a later time. And now, on with the webinar. Tam?
Thanks, Skip, and welcome everyone. Thank you for joining today. As the title indicates, we're going to try to make BCP simple for you today. As Skip alluded to, there's a tendency in the field to kind of overcomplicate the basics and to really expand the BCP scope beyond its core. So today we're going to try and get back to basics and even discuss a few shortcuts. But before I go any further, let me first just give you a little background about Kingsbridge BCP and the experience we're drawing on from to speak to you today about business continuity. So Kingsbridge is a software and services company. We've been operating, as Skip mentioned, in the BCP space since 1983. We have a suite of online business continuity planning software solutions that include integrated communication tools and mobile apps. We also provide a range of professional services. We write business continuity plans. We provide on-site training where we share our plan writing methodology. And we also perform tabletop exercises, gap analyses, and plan audits. Today, we're going to talk about keeping business continuity plans and the planning process simple. For some of you on the call, you may have been tasked with being responsible for the corporate BCP, but you may have very few resources available to you, very little buy-in from management, perhaps very little knowledge, or perhaps a little bit of all of these things. What we're going to do today is to really strip plan development down into the simple minimums you need to build your BCP from scratch. Now, for those of you who've already been writing your plan, you'll also see ways of kind of streamlining your current BCP that maybe has become a little unwieldy to manage. First, we're going to start with talking about the role of motivation and expectations. This isn't something you typically see spoken about very often in the BCP space, but it can really go a long way to alleviating some of the frustration that can be felt by business continuity planners when they aren't getting the level of engagement they would like from their colleagues and management. We'll then step through some of the ways we've streamlined the plan development process. The majority of our clients come to us with a degree of urgency, either due to a customer request or to meet a regulatory requirement or a pandemic. They need a plan and they need it fast. So we need to be able to deliver quickly and without taking a lot of time away from employees. Lastly, we'll take a look at where to go after you get that first draft, where you can take a deeper dive to make your plan more robust. And then, as Skip mentioned, we'll try and leave some time at the end for questions. So let's start with understanding motivation and how it should impact the expectations of the BC planner. This may not sound like a key factor in business continuity, but can actually make all the difference in making your life easier. We have a number of regular clients we work with, and for each of those, the source of their motivation is slightly different, but they basically fall into two categories. First, we have those who come to us because they have auditors or key customers breathing down their neck. They need a plan or a tabletop exercise or a plan update so they can check a box to make somebody else happy. This is what I call the have to have group. Those that really don't care if their plan is effective. They have no intentions of investing any more into the company's preparedness than the bare minimum required to check that auditor's box. And that's really the only reason they have a BC role within their organization. They're motivated to have a BCP because they have to have one. Now, the second group are genuinely concerned about being able to continue business after a disaster. These groups, not surprisingly, tend to be in earthquake, tornado, and hurricane-prone locations, those natural disaster areas. Their CEO or some other C-level person is actually a little freaked out and losing sleep at night that if the big one happens, they really don't know how they're going to recover. And it's really important that you understand that primary motivator for your organization. So before I go into why this is important, let's do a quick poll. So I'll have Skip pop the poll up here. And I'd like to hear how many of you are in organizations or working with organizations that fall into that have to have category versus the want to have category, or maybe have a little bit of both going on. So I'll just give you a couple of minutes to fill that in, and I'll have Skip put up the summary once he feels like everybody's finished there. We have a summary there, Skip?
Yeah, so some poll answers coming in. They're just finishing off right now. So I'm just going to end the poll in a few seconds. And there are the results.
All right. So luckily we have some want to haves, but we have a lot of the both and a few have to haves on our call. Not surprisingly, I often find there's a combination of both forms of motivation. And that is going to really impact how you develop your plan. So if your management team wants to check that box, they are of the have to have variety. And like your poll indicates, you may have a few in both camps, have to have and want to have. If you're dealing with the have to have, you're going to have great difficulty getting beyond the first draft of your plan. You need to understand that going in. These people will not give you much time or guidance. Their direct reports, the frontline departments you need to work with, may similarly not be motivated to participate. Where you do find pockets of motivation, those pockets of want to have, you'll want to focus on those groups and get as far as you can with them. As you start assembling the plan, you will most definitely find gaps and other issues that may prevent a successful recovery, but they might not be sufficient to fail an audit or give a customer the impression that you're not prepared. If so, there will likely be very little appetite to address those gaps and findings. You'll need to document what you've uncovered and the efforts you've made to raise these issues with management. And then eventually you have to let the chips fall where they may. A business interruption of some magnitude may be the only thing that will force this have to have group to budge and move forward. Now, if your management team is actually truly motivated out of concern for actual recovery from an event, you'll have far more buy-in to move beyond a basic draft plan. They'll be eager to run exercises and interested in gaps that are found during the plan development process, as well as investing in measures to increase the organization's preparedness. They see BCP as a priority. These are the dream bosses for a BC planner, though, as the poll indicates, you're not going to find 100% of these in any of your organizations. So if you don't have one of these dream bosses, if you don't have one of these dream bosses, set your expectations so you don't get frustrated. Ultimately, any executive, regardless of motivation, wants to see things done efficiently, and they want to see a value add. Often during the development of a BCP, we uncover all kinds of inefficiencies, and the whole process ends up being of considerable value to the organization, independent of improving their ability to recover from a business interruption. If you can demonstrate that you're adding value, you may get some execs moving from just wanting to check a box to truly motivated to have a solid plan. But if you're perceived as a drain on resources, they're going to resist all the way. So let's jump into how we can get the basics of your plan together as simply and efficiently as possible with minimal frustration and providing some of that value add that management is looking for. We'll begin with the Threat Risk Assessment, or TRA. Now, there's lots of debate in the BCP space about the role of the TRA in your business continuity plan. This relates somewhat to where the line is drawn between the field of risk management and the field of BCP, as well as the utility of the TRA itself in plan development. Regardless of your opinion on these debates, completing the threat risk assessment does not have to be a big onerous task. In fact, you can even get away without one. So deciding whether to take on the threat risk assessment, again, comes from a place of motivation. If you need to demonstrate that your threat risk assessment is complete to please an auditor, or if your organization is actually interested in the results of the threat risk assessment so they can actually invest in efforts to mitigate risk, then by all means, you'll want to proceed with the assessment. If, on the other hand, you need a BCP done quickly, no one is looking to see your threat risk assessment, and you know your organization has no intentions of mitigating any of the risks that the assessment uncovers, then you can actually proceed with developing your plan without it. Now, if you decide to proceed, it can be pretty straightforward to do from a BCP perspective, particularly if you keep the scope manageable. You're going to hear me say that a lot. There are many risks that can impact a company that do not fall under the scope of BCP, such as a market downturn, the appearance of a new competitor, a change in the exchange rate, changes in legislation. But when it comes to BCP, we're really just looking at human, technical, natural threats, things that can cause a rather significant, unexpected, and fairly immediate threat to your business. Think fire, tornado, power outage, server failure, pandemic, internet outage, loss of critical workforce, etc. You simply need to make a list of these possible threats, and then for each one, consider two primary factors. How likely is this threat to occur? Not likely, likely, very likely. How significant would the impact be if the threat occurred? Not significant, significant, very significant. And then some choose to add how much advance notice you might get. Some, none, lots. You can then use these categories to rank those threats. Those that have some combination of high likelihood and impact combined with very little notice will rise to the top of the list. If you do need a TRA, software will make it much faster. Using our Shield software, for example, with a few clicks, we can generally have this completed within an hour, including any discussions and debates that might have to take place. BCP software tools such as ours will rank those threats for you and can also provide mitigation measures you might want to consider for each of those threats that rise to the top, so you have a starting point for making your organization more prepared. Now, if you don't need a TRA to check a box, or your priority is really just to get your plan together and fast, you can actually move forward with developing your plan without a TRA if you focus on preparing for one or more of four possible outcomes: no building, no people, no systems, or no suppliers. Every realized threat will pretty much land you in one or more of these four categories. For the no building, your physical location where your staff go to work each day or where you produce your widgets is partially or completely uninhabitable for a period of time. This could be the result of a fire, a tornado, a gas leak, an active shooter, the need for physical distancing. There could be lots of reasons. Next, we have no people. Whether a pandemic has struck the region, a hurricane, or other regional emergency has left your workforce with personal responsibilities that take precedence over their responsibilities to your organization, or maybe food poisoning has struck following an office party. You're missing critical people and or a critical number of people required to continue business as normal. Third one is no systems. Could be your data centers wiped out, or your connectivity to your data center or systems is wiped out. Could be construction in your parking lot, a significant fire, a disgruntled employee taking their frustrations out on your server room can all leave you with no access to systems. And then lastly, no suppliers or third-party providers. Whether they supply you with software as a solution, courier services, power, internet, or the raw materials you require to manufacture your widgets, these days, more and more companies are outsourcing, and the ability of those vendors to continue operating impacts your ability to continue operating. A supplier limitation is now something companies really need to prepare for. So if you prepare for any combination of these outcomes, you'll pretty much be prepared for anything. So we've just glossed over this approach here, but if you'd like more information, we do have a white paper available on our website at kingsbridgebcp.com. Under the heading of Academy, you'll find that paper called No People Building Systems White Paper. The URL we have on screen here will take you to the listing of resources we have. And this URL will come up later in the presentation as I have another resource to recommend that can be found in the same location. So if you don't have a chance to record this one, no worries. I also have this URL on the last slide of the presentation. So lots of time to copy this one down. So with the TRA either completed or skipped over, it's now time to tackle the business impact analysis, or BIA. Now, this is where things can really go off the rails in some organizations. We at Kingsbridge go into the BIA with two primary goals in mind. At the end of the BIA process, we want to know what are the priorities for recovery. For example, are we restoring the manufacturing of widget A before or after the manufacturing of widget B? And how long can we typically wait before we restore the purchasing of materials to produce these widgets? The second thing we want to know is what resources our employees require to actually do these priority processes. We're talking applications, vendors, other departments, special equipment. All of your BI questions should be leading you to answer these questions. What order are you recovering in, and what do we need to make that happen? So what you need is a series of simple, bare bones questions. You really need to minimize the volume of data you capture. If the list of questions is too long, your participants are going to tune out. And if they or their management are only there to check that box, they will most certainly tune out. I can't emphasize enough that you need to really keep the end in mind when you're assembling your BIA questions and manage that scope. Definitely avoid open-ended questions where at all possible with your BIA. This generates a huge amount of information to sift through when the surveys are complete. If, for example, you have Word, referred to as Word, MS Word, Microsoft Office, it makes it very difficult to collate results. Where possible, provide defined pick lists of resources that those completing the surveys can choose from. This makes collating results far easier. Secondly, only ask for what you'll use. There are lots of very expansive BIA survey questionnaires available, but sometimes they collect more information than you really require. For example, a commonly asked survey question is the minimum number of people required to execute a process. It's understandable why the question is being asked. At the end of the day, the planner wants to know how many people and workstations are going to be needed as the recovery takes place. However, particularly in small to medium-sized organizations, capturing number of people by business process can result in a lot of double counting. Depending on the recovery order of those business processes, the same person may be able to support more than one process. So, what questions should be asked? First, you'll need a list of critical business processes from each area, the ones that keep the departments awake at night if they were to miss a deadline, the ones that ensure the business can keep operating. If you are responsible for buying the birthday cards for this month's birthday celebrants, not critical. If you're responsible for buying the raw materials for producing a key product, that is critical. I find anywhere from 1 to 8 processes per department will generally cover everything critical. Any more, and they may be going at this at too granular a level. If departments are having trouble defining what is critical, it's also helpful, particularly in large organizations, to let them know that management will be vetting the list. So if they don't think management will recognize the business process that they're listing, it's likely not on management's radar and therefore likely not critical. The next bit of information can be captured in a couple ways, depending again on your preference and whether you have auditors with expectations. So first, let me describe the traditional bottom-up BIA approach. So this is where for each process we have identified, we ask the department how long can this process be non-operational for before there are significant impacts to the business? How long can it just sit idle if we need to build the organization up from scratch? This is your maximum tolerable outage, and this is the starting point for establishing the recovery order, one of our key objectives. You then ask what the impact might be should the timeline they've provided be exceeded. This doesn't have to be a complicated process. It just gives an indication of the areas of concern if we blow past the time that they've set out. It's usually most helpful to think of this in categories like what would be the financial impact, the reputational impact, the impact on customers, etc. This can simply be on a scale of low, medium, high, critical. It's just an indicator. No need to crunch tons of numbers here. If you want true financial impacts in dollars and cents, you're starting to stray a long way from simple. Most organizations simply don't have the data to figure out the downtime cost for many of their processes, nor does it make a huge difference at the end of the day. Usually management has spent enough time reviewing the profitability of their endeavors that they have a pretty good sense of this, or at least close enough to know what the major priority products and services are post-disaster. This question of impact serves two purposes. One, it gives management a sense of where the areas of concern are that led to the timeline or maximum tolerable outage values provided for the business process. And it checks a box for auditors who want to see an impact rating. So with maximum tolerable outages and impacts, you can now sort and present these initial results to management for them to vet and tweak them and provide specific thresholds or recovery time objectives that they would like to stay within for key processes. Now, keep in mind that the relative order of the processes is most important. Recovery may progress more quickly or more slowly depending on the situation. And even some changes in the priorities may need to happen depending on the situation again. But this forms a starting point, the target goals that the organization will work toward reaching. Now, I mentioned there's another approach that you can take to get to this endpoint. It's more of what I call a top-down approach, and you've likely seen it shared by some other groups in the BCP space. There's some question within the industry of the value of capturing impact ratings for each business process, as they're quite subjective, or even asking the business units themselves to provide timelines for recovery. If you don't have an auditor that needs to kind of see your work, and depending on the engagement level of your management team, you may be able to take this top-down approach. Your management team may be happy to sit down and define these things themselves. They may be able to develop that list of processes on their own and determine timelines for each, or at least take that list of processes that has been gathered and simply sort it on their own. Business units can always challenge the decisions if they're not happy with what they think is significant. But this latter approach may or may not make an auditor happy. So you need to test those waters, but can be really efficient if you have an engaged management team with good knowledge of frontline operations. So whether you take a bottom up or a top down approach, ultimately out of this first portion of the BIA, the goal is to have that initial playbook of sorts, the timelines and recovery order that management would like to have the organization working toward following a business interruption. Now, the second purpose I mentioned for the BIA is to get an inventory of what is needed to actually do these business processes. This generally includes other departments, equipment, software, applications, vendors, critical people. And here we're only looking to track single points of failure. We'll talk numbers of people later. Now, instead of just writing down all of these dependencies, I can't emphasize how helpful it is, again, to start with clean pick lists for departments to choose from. We've mentioned already that open text fields are a nightmare to work with, and how many different ways a user can refer to a single application like Microsoft Word. A software tool with a decent database backend can hold these lists for you and help you to maintain them easily. I recommend getting a personnel export from HR, a vendor export from either your vendor management system, or if you have one, or from your AP system, and a list of software and applications from IT. If your industry has a lot of specialized equipment, an asset listing may also be helpful. And then you can use these as pick lists for your BIA. This gives you nice, clean data to work with right away instead of wasting time renaming items, correcting typos in order to collate your data. Now, with the recovery order created and the needs of each business process determined, we need to do the analysis on those needs to see if the available resources can support the recovery order that management has requested. The most critical of these in today's work environment tends to be IT, and a good working relationship with IT is one of the most important relationships you can forge during your BCP work. The BC and DR plans in your organization have to work together, so it's really helpful if the BC planner and the DR planner can also work together, unless, of course, they're one and the same person. Great. So you'll need to verify that IT can restore the systems required to support the business processes scheduled for day 1, day 2, etc. Hopefully your IT department has a DR plan that they can share with you, and that will allow you to verify whether the planned recovery can be supported. If there are gaps between what management has requested and what IT can deliver, work with IT on how to present that gap. We don't want them to feel like they've been thrown under the bus by the BCP planner in your reports to management. They may just need more resources to fill that gap, and you can now help them build that business case to get those resources. Now, got our BIA done. Before we go back to the teams to actually start building the plan itself, we need a little bit of information from management so that you know the parameters you're working within to identify recovery strategies for each team. Here's some of the key information we like to get from our management team up front. First, who's going to run the show when bad things happen? Who's going to take responsibility at the management level to run the recovery? Get their team structure and membership figured out. You can then share this with the departments when you meet with them about developing their plan. Secondly, what is the culture or appetite around working from home now and during a disaster? Pre-COVID, this was a sticky question. Now, not so much, but you still want to know what departments you can leverage this strategy for. This option can then be discussed with those areas that management is comfortable having work remotely. Is there other physical space owned, rented, or available to the organization in some other way that could be leveraged for employees to work from should any current or occupied properties be damaged, or to allow employees to be spaced further apart? This would be great information to know before you meet with a facilities team who may be required to support any physical movement of people and equipment to other locations. Where does management plan to assemble if their regular space is not available? You probably want to identify someplace close for a more localized event and somewhere further away when there's an event of a more regional nature, as well as simple teleconferencing technology that they can leverage that does not rely on your own internal telephony systems for when physically gathering is not possible. Also want to know what methods of communication they plan on using. We talked about the teleconferencing. How are they going to communicate with staff? Who will be responsible for these communications? If they decide on corporate email for communications, verify that everyone has access to email from home and that it is very redundant. They may decide to use a phone tree or a notification tool. Regardless of what method is selected, it will likely involve leveraging personal contact information for after hours events. So discuss how this personal contact information will be captured, updated, and shared. Help them think through this and then share that expectation with the departments when you meet with them. Who will the spokesperson be? Should the media get involved? And then who is responsible for contacting the board or any regulators? You want to ensure this important responsibility gets assigned clearly and correctly. With these questions answered, you can then get started on interviews with the departments to start getting them or you writing their plans. You have a couple of options when it comes to assembling the plan itself. Like I mentioned, either you write the plan yourself or you delegate it. If you're in that have to have organization where you need to meet a third-party deadline and the level of internal engagement is pretty low, you will likely be better off doing most of the work yourself or with dedicated resources. Otherwise, you can delegate. Either way, spend some time creating a template. There will be actions that all teams need to take regardless of their role, such as internal communications, tracking their activities during recovery, doing a postmortem afterward, and resources they all need to be aware of, such as the address of alternate work locations, contact information for those that will be managing the response. Start with a template with all of this type of information pre-populated, including some of the guidelines you've received from the management team, and then they simply need to fill in the recovery strategies for their particular business processes. Now, one way of both simplifying your plan development while still leveraging templates, again, is to use BCP software. So we have another poll here to feed my curious mind. So Skip, if you could put up our next polling question. I'd like to find out from those of you participating today, how many of you are actually using BCP software? I'll give you a couple minutes to answer that one. I know we have a client or two on the call with us today, so I expect we'll have at least one or two yeses from this poll. So whenever you're ready, Skip, you can put the poll results up. All right. Well, we're about 50-50 on the call today. So 55% using software and 45% not using software. All right, that's good. I'm going to speak to both. Definitely using software is great, but there are other ways. So if you're using software or you're in the market for software, built-in templates that you can customize to your needs are really helpful. So our Shield software, for example, comes with templates for a wide range of common teams such as human resources, accounting, IT, manufacturing, communications, etc. We also offer a template structured specifically for all the teams you might find in a credit union. I'll also mention that we now have a free edition of our Shield software. For those that might be interested in that tool, I have the URL here on screen for you, and I've included it again on the last slide of the presentation. So if you miss it now, again, there'll be another opportunity to find it later. So whether departments are going to write up the plans themselves or you are going to take the lead, encourage them to start with these really basic questions. What would you do if, and then work through the main outcomes we discussed from the threat risk assessment. When it comes to no building, use the guidance provided by management. Are they in support of work from home? Do they have an alternate work site in mind? How critical is some of the equipment that these critical processes require, and how can we get that to another location or physically space it apart? Now is the time, based on the recovery order that management has validated, to determine how many people they need to support the business processes that are to be operational on each day, and whether those people can work from home or need a physical space. Verify the number of physical seats needed each day on site. This will determine how much physical space needs to be secured. If alternate sites were offered up by management, you can look at which are best for each department. If alternate sites were not offered and management has no interest in determining these arrangements in advance, at least you'll have documented numbers and resources for when that need arises. For no people, look at a 30 to 40% reduction in workforce. Allow the departments to work through what cross-training they have in place, what documentation can be leveraged to support those that might be catapulted into a position they've never done before, and how delegation of authority might work. Based again on the recovery order of operations, determine whether they can support their critical processes with a reduction in workforce. For no systems, there may be manual workarounds that can be put in place. If IT has indicated they cannot meet any of the recovery timelines for any systems that priority business processes are dependent on, this is a good time to share this. Often business units can do without a particular system for the short term if some other systems are available. So what they deemed critical during the BIA sometimes becomes a little less critical when you require they become a little more creative as to how they need to work around it. For no vendors, document the workarounds or alternate vendors that can be leveraged, but also document those vendors for which there are really no workarounds at all. For these ones, it may be worth seeking their BCPs to determine whether they can meet the recovery time objectives you have for these business processes. We do have a resource for this on our website. It can actually be pretty easy for a vendor to pass any kind of vendor audit. If you want to find out if there's really any meat on the bones of the BCP that they say they have, we have a list of questions you might want to consider asking. These are in the same location as that white paper I mentioned before. So if you go to kingsbridgebcp.com/BCP Academy, you'll see a link to the vendor BCP questionnaire. Similar to the link to our software, I've included this link again in the last slide of the presentation, so you'll have another opportunity to get to this one again later as well. Lastly, do any cross-referencing or validation of the needs that came up during the BIA. Validate that all of the dependencies that were identified can be supported based on the recovery order of the business process for those teams. You'll also want to be sure you have contact information for both employees and for vendors or other critical contacts that are necessary for recovery, as well as any reference documents that might be needed, say documented manual processes, procedures, contract details, floor plans, generator specifications, anything that might be needed during the time when networks will not be available. So they won't just be able to pull these off of their common drives. And you can base this on estimates for recovery of those drives that you can get from IT. When it comes to putting everything in writing, the most important thing of all to keep in mind is to keep it short. A really experienced BC planner shared during a workshop we were running a rule he recommends when putting your plan together. He called it the 3-binder rule. Now, back in the day of paper plans, there actually was a physical binder included in this approach. Nowadays, think of it more virtually as the equivalent of the amount of information you might find in a binder, a pamphlet, and a business card. So let me explain what I mean by that. Those not directly involved in the recovery process, in that they're not on a recovery team, they really just need the amount of information that could fit on a business card. They need to know that there is a business continuity plan in place, and they need to know who to contact or who will contact them to provide them with instructions once health and safety concerns are addressed and it's time to recover the business. That can all fit on a business card. For each of your recovery teams, they need to know about the same amount of information as you could fit into a pamphlet. Their basic recovery strategies for each of their critical business processes based on those 4 possible scenarios: no building, no people, no systems, no third-party vendors, with whatever supporting documentation they may need to reference, like paper forms or manual procedures, contact information that they might need to utilize depending on the scenario they face. This will not include all of the BIA details. What you need in the plan are the results of the analysis, the A in BIA, not a dump of the raw data. Facilities and IT will likely need a list of applications and workspace needs collated by day and team so that they know who they are supplying with on each day. The full binder worth of information is what your auditor needs to see. This will include all your plans you've developed for each team, but also the introduction, the scope, the purpose, the policies, the change logs, your emergency response procedures, such as your evacuation plans will be in there, along with all your BIA data. As your plan evolves, you might want to also include the results of any exercises or tests that you've done in the past, as well as who attended events. Much of this information is critical for demonstrating that you have a complete and effective plan and that you've been diligently maintaining it. So a binder's worth of information for the auditors, a pamphlet's worth of information for the response teams, and a business card's worth of information for the rest of the organization. Where you need to focus the majority of your energy in writing your plan is on the pamphlet portion. This is where the rubber is really going to hit the road in terms of recovering the business. Once the team responses are together, then worry about the binder's worth for your auditors and the business card snippet for the rest of the organization. So, what to do once the basic plan is together? Well, there we are. Get on the right slide here. For some of you, this is as far as you'll ever get. If the motivation within your organization comes from wanting to check that box with the auditor or wave a document in front of a customer, the appetite for addressing the gaps versus accepting the risk is probably not very high. The management team may be willing to roll the dice, happy to figure it out at the time, and will not spend much time on the plan from here on. You might get an exercise or 2 out of them, but it might be a struggle. As you document the gaps and share near misses with them, you may get more traction, so you'll need to continually reassess. If there is some appetite to keep improving the plan, there will be gaps to fill. Might be a lack of physical space or designated space. There may be some systems that aren't going to come up as quickly as departments would like. Might be a shortage of equipment or some departments that are really going to struggle if certain employees or a particular vendor is not available. These are all things that need to be worked on to make the plan better. It won't be a finished plan, no plan ever is, but you will have a basic plan with established priorities that everyone can work toward, and then the gaps that need to be filled. Just be sure you don't write fiction. If there's no decision, for example, around where people are going to relocate to, say so in the plan. Say, await direction from management regarding an alternate workspace. Start with departments where you truly have support, the want to have folks. Gain some momentum in those areas that are willing to work with you. Sometimes what you manage to resolve with one department may turn out to be a great solution for another one. You can't get blood from a stone, as they say, so focus your energy on groups that are eager and document the issues with those that are not. It may take a near miss to get some traction with your management team, so watch for opportunities internally or on the news and keep reassessing. So in conclusion, when you're tackling your BCP or simplifying what you've currently got, take a look at what is motivating your organization to have a BCP. Set your expectations accordingly, and then only capture what you need. Complete the threat risk assessment if your organization will use it or needs it. Otherwise, go with a results-based approach of no building, no people, no systems, no third-party suppliers. Complete your BIA with the results you need in mind, and consider really streamlining by establishing priorities directly with your management team if you don't need to show your work to a third party. Keep that 3-binder approach in mind to keep your plan from getting too unwieldy. And lastly, leverage technology, whether that be using BCP software or pulling pick lists from existing systems within your organization or establishing templates. The more you can automate and avoid manually processing information, the better, both during the writing and the maintenance of your BCP. And that brings us to the end of our presentation. You can see the 2 links at the bottom that I referenced during the presentation today. As well, if you have submitted questions through the Q&A, I'm not sure how much time we have left. Got a few minutes. We'll throw it over to Skip, but you can also email questions to that email address there. So Skip, do we have any questions that came in that we can answer during the webinar today?
Yeah, there's a good question, Tam, that was, I think you can see the question and answers there, that came in at 2:44, asking about SLAs. And then there was at 2:46, another question associated with the SLAs, where it was asking, should the SLAs be assigned with recovery time objectives, RTOs, and RPOs? And I thought that maybe we could answer that if we had a few minutes, and it looks like we've got a few minutes. So did you want to take a stab at that?
Yeah, so I see the one at 244. Can you rely on vendor SLAs to provide assurance of availability of services? Yes and no, and I think Skip wrote that to some extent in his answer. What I do recommend when you're speaking with vendors and you want some assurance of their availability is really to start digging into their BCP and using that vendor questions tool that I referenced earlier that you can see in our BCP Academy might give you some good additional questions that you can ask your vendors to give you a little more confidence that they can truly meet the SLA that they've published in their agreement with you. So that would be my suggestion there. What was the next one, Skip?
Where should the SLAs be aligned with the RTOs and RPOs?
Yeah. Absolutely. If you, in fact, I would argue you'd want them to be a little bit more aggressive. So for example, if you can handle an application or a vendor to not be able to meet their needs for 3 days, you better hope their SLA is more like 2. Like, give yourself some breathing room. So when I look at RTOs and I see an RTO of 3 days, I want to make sure all the vendors that support that business process with an RTO of 3 days have a recovery time or an SLA of 1 or 2 days. I don't want to be right down to the wire, having everything in place and still waiting on my vendor. And same thing with RPOs. Those even more important probably to try and nail those. You don't want to be losing data. RPOs are kind of a black and white situation. So if you can't afford to lose the data, then you want to make sure those RPOs are going to meet your needs. Anything else, Skip?
Nope, that's all we had. I think that that the webinar is over, unless there's any further questions that are going to come in at the last minute. Currently, the Q&A is not lighting up, so I think you answered pretty much everybody's questions.
Great. Well, thank you, everyone. I think this recording will be available. Skip, I'll let you speak to that.
Yeah, one of the questions actually that did come in, we answered it. I'm not sure if everybody sees it or not, but we will be sending out a link either later today or tomorrow with access for the webinar so that everybody can rewatch it if they want to see everything that went on. And if there's any last minute questions that come in after the webinar is over, we'll also answer those for everybody as well. But keep an eye on your email, and there will be something there today or tomorrow.
Great. Thanks, everyone.
Excellent. Thank you, everybody. And thank you very much. And have a great rest of your Wednesday.